Okay, so welcome everybody to our reply speeches and flowing workshop. I am so happy to be joined by our lovely graphic designer, Borko, who's going to be taking over the first half of our reply speech seminar. He is an incredible best legend. He competed, judged, and was also one of our facilitators at the debate summer camp this year. And I would say that he is probably the expert on reply speeches. So he has put together an incredible presentation for you all for the first half, and then for the second half of this hour, or maybe a little bit longer, but hour, I'm going to be talking to you about note taking or flowing. So with that, I'd like to introduce Borko and have a great seminar, and I'll see you in the second half.
All right, thank you, Julia, for that lovely introduction. I'm just a second to share my screen. So yeah, all of you should be able to see the screen right now. As Julia said, I'm going to talking to you about reply speeches, some do's and don'ts that I've learned during my time as a competitor, as a judge, and as a facilitator. And also I'm going to share with you some patterns / strategies that will help you structure your reply speech. Now, so this is the agenda for today's presentation. I'm going to start out by telling you what's the actual point of a reply speech. Then we'll go over the do's, we'll go over the don'ts, and then I'm going to share the strategies. Starting with the actual point of the reply speech, what you should know is that the reply speech is much different than all the other speeches in the debate. Not only by it being just 4 minutes instead of 8, but also in terms of how you have to structure it, in terms of style, and pretty much everything. I think one of the most important things is that during reply speeches, the debate is more or less already over. So what you have to do is just show us this new perspective on the issues that occur during the debate. You have to go over the debate, look at it at the big picture, and kind of analyze it. And a mistake that a lot of debaters do is just simply recap what happened. It's not the point of a reply speech because we have already listened to the debate. We just want to hear a new perspective on it, as I said. And most importantly, show us why your side is actually the one that won the debate. When it comes to reply speakers and trying to figure out what's going to be your style of doing a reply speech, that's probably the hardest thing. So hopefully with some of the do's, you're going to be able to like pick and choose and kind of figure it out on your own once you start actually doing the reply speeches. Or if you're already a reply speaker, kind of see what to add maybe to your reply speeches, and then maybe what to remove when you go over the don'ts. In terms of what to do, judges always like to hear a creative approach to the reply speech. By this point, we've already heard 6 different constructive speeches, around an hour of just listening and taking notes. So we definitely enjoy hearing something interesting. So feel free to use something like a metaphor, analogy, and like an interesting, funny story. Like I always say, make us laugh, make us cry, make us mad about something, make us care. That's the most important part of a reply speech. We as judges want to see the passion and why you believe that your team won, and convince us that your team actually won. A really good strategy I like in reply speeches is some kind of a reference to a previous speech, because it kind of gives it that full circle moment. For example, if you are the first speaker of the proposition and then also the reply speaker of the proposition, you can make it so that your attention grabber of your reply speech references the attention grabber of your first speech. Another thing that you have to look out for is the style in the reply speech. generally it has to be different than your original speech, in the sense that I like hearing like a very tone, maybe like a bit more emotional. If you're a best competitor who has done prose, poetry, or basically any other category, that's definitely to your advantage, because you know how to do it a bit more dramatically, and that's what the reply speech is kind of achieved to do. Yeah, next thing is the dramatic pauses. When done in the right moment, they can be very strategic, very good, and bring your point. And also it's good to have a shift in your body language than your previous speech that you've done. I would say that, well, in constructive speeches with your body language, you try to be a bit more assertive. In reply speeches, you try to be a bit more passionate. And other things that you have that are good to do during a reply speech is to use a less confrontational tone. We are looking out for like something more analytical, but also, as I said, emotional at times. It's good to use past tense when possible, because as I say, to just show us how you want the debate right now with the arguments that you've presented, with the rebuttals, and in third speeches with the clash points and with the impact that you've shown. And finally, impact calculus and burden comparison. Those two sound a bit like complicated, but they're really not. I'm gonna go over them in reply speech strategies, and I'm gonna prove to you that they're actually something very valuable to have in a reply speech, and not that complicated. So moving on to the what not to do. These are mostly stuff that I've heard during reply speeches that I have not enjoyed as a judge, and that I've heard other judges not enjoy during reply speeches. One such thing would be having new material in your speech, like giving new arguments, new rebuttals to probably like the third speaker of the other team, or giving us new research from what you have. This is generally frowned upon, and it shows us that the speaker does not understand what a reply speech should be. As I said, it's about giving a new perspective, not trying to have a final say in terms of rebuttals, because, as I said, the debate is already over at this point. Yeah, another bad thing is just summarizing the debate. For example, a lot of reply speakers start, and in the first speech, we presented this argument, and then they rebutted it like that, and then they presented their argument. To me, that's not only ineffective, but it's also boring, as the 7 and 8 speech I'm listening to, and as things that I've already heard. And yeah, the infamous imagine two worlds. I know that a lot of debaters use that, and probably some of you who use that are gonna take personal offense. But it's all known that judges do not like that. And I want to explain to you, for even the enjoyers of Imagine Two Worlds, why that's not a good thing. So first of all, as a reply speaker, you want to surprise us in a way. Considering that Imagine Two Worlds is a huge cliche, judges won't be surprised by hearing it. And the other main problem with Imagine Two Worlds is that even when used, it's used ineffectively due to the speaker not understanding how to actually use it. And instead of making a comparison of impacts, they kind of just use it to go, yeah, I mean, obviously our work is much better. What I mean is they don't give a constructive analysis to why their world is better. They just simply state it. So yeah, I say try not to use Imagine Two Worlds. The strategies that I have suggested are much better. And for that said, I'm gonna go over them right now. The first one is impact calculus. So impact calculus is actually a very easy thing to use. It's meant to compare the impacts of that were shown during the third speeches by both third speakers. And to do that, you use three metrics: magnitude, time frame, and probability. With magnitude, it is meant the severity or the significance of a consequence. With time frame, we mean the time span that is given until the consequence happens. And the probability is the likelihood of that consequence happening. So here is like an example how that would occur during a real debate. Just a second. So let's say in this debate, it's about which is worse, climate change versus world war. And you're on the side that climate change is worse. When you're going to be doing your impact calculus, you're going to state how, yeah, on magnitude, climate change wins because it's something that is going to affect everyone in the world and it's going to lead to extinction, while world war is going to affect just a portion of humanity. In probability, climate change also wins because it's something that we know it's going to happen. It's scientifically proven. And with world war, we might get another world war, but we might also not. So the probability is uncertain. In terms of time frame, we can give the point to world war because, as I said, even though it's uncertain, it can happen at any given moment. While with climate change, we know there are at least 20 to 30 years until that happens. So yeah, I advise you when doing impact calculus to try to show how your team won in all three metrics. And if you have to give one, give time frame because to the other side. Because even if their time frame is more advantageous, when their magnitude and probability are on, it doesn't make really sense for their side to be better anyways. And yeah, I'm gonna later show you another example of how to do impact calculus. But for now, I'm gonna move on to the other strategy, which is burden comparison. I'm not sure in the intro to debate how like Julia presented it, whether it's burden of proof, main thesis, or team line. And I know that every debater kind of knows it as a different thing, but in this case, we mean the main statement that has to be proven through the debate by the proposition and the opposition. So in an ideal debate, both teams are going to have this element, the burden of proof, that they're going to try to prove during their debate. And if they don't manage to prove that, and the other team does, the other team is the one who is supposed to win. So in your reply speech, you can do a burden comparison where you put both burdens next to each other and basically analyze them and show how on your side your burden of proof was proved and on the other side it was not, and also show why. There is only one drawback to that strategy, and it's that not always the other team would have a burden of proof or like main thesis team line, solely because it happens a lot during debates for teams to miss some arguments. And if you rely on having a burden of making a burden comparison before the debate, and then during the debate you see that the other team hasn't provided a team line, it's going to be hard for you to do it when they don't have a team line. So yeah. And I think I've said a lot of information, so it's time for any questions, if anyone has anything to ask. All right, then I hopefully assume everything is clear. Next thing we'll do is I'm going to give an example reply speech because I've said a lot of stuff and sometimes it's best to see it in practice. the motion to which I'm gonna give the reply speech is the following one. I hope you all see it. It's this house would not lie to its children about Santa Claus. So this is a debate that already happened, and for you to hear only the reply speech, it would be kind of hard for you to actually gauge it in terms of what arguments were said, but just trust me during the reply speech when I say something that has happened during the debate that it has happened. Yeah. So I'm gonna start my reply speech in 3, 2, 1. You're snuggling under a warm blanket, a hot cup of cocoa in one hand and a freshly baked gingerbread cookie in the other. Mariah Carey has defrosted and her guilty pleasure of a Christmas song is playing in the background. You are surrounded by your friends, your relatives, your siblings, and your parents. And gifts, 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 so many gifts. A brand new bike, your favorite board game, a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and is that an Xbox over there? Oh my God, wow. Isn't it so nice that Santa Claus knows you so well and cares about you? But, oh, wait, it's not Santa who knows you. It's not Santa who cares about you. It's your parents. Dear Judge, I'm the reply speaker of the proposition, and I will start out by stating our case and then providing an impact calculus to show you how we won the debate. So starting with our team line, restating our team line, we believe that parents not lying to children about Santa Claus is not only a great way to promote the bond between them, but also highlights the true meaning of Christmas. And I would quickly want to bring your attention to our definition about lying about Santa Claus once again. We defined it as lying about the origin of their Christmas gifts. So we're not saying, as the opposition said, that we want to erase the fantasy of Santa Claus. We want to keep the fantasy, but we also do not want to hide the true heroes of the holidays, which is the parents. And with that said, I'm going to move to the impact calculus, where I measure the magnitude, time frame, and probability of both sides and their impacts in order to show how we won. In terms of magnitude on our side, we proposed to end the most common lie a parent tells their child. A lie that we have proved to be pointless, but can have bad consequences because it normalizes lying to children. On the opposition side's magnitude, we can see that the proposed impact is based only on the individual speaker's personal and nostalgic memories. Therefore, they have no actual proof that what they're stating would be globally true. And as our example of Jewish and Muslim Christmas holidays showed, it's not globally true. So we believe we win on magnitude. Next, in terms of time frame, our side would need 1, maybe 2 generations of parents not lying about Santa to actually erase the lie about Santa. And in terms of the time frame of the opposition, it's aligning completely with the status quo, so we can give that point to the opposition. I'm sorry. However, in probability, things looks different. Let's consider the majority of kids who love Santa. They love Santa because Santa is the one who is giving them the presents. So imagine if they knew that the parents were the ones who give them the presents, then all that love would be redirected to the parents. And I would say the probability for that is very high, considering the status quo is children loving the ones who give them the presents. However, on the opposition side, they rely on kids not feeling betrayed when parents tell them they have lied about Santa throughout their whole life, but who does not feel betrayed when they're lied to. So I would say the probability of everything being well as a parent-child bond very low in terms of the opposition. So I say we win on both probability and magnitude. And in conclusion, our case defends the true meaning of a bright holiday, which is not the gifts, but the familial bonds. Because baby, all I want for Christmas is you. Thank you. All right, so thank you, Julia. I think that was from me. Does anybody have any questions after the reply speech? All right, then. Then in this case, I'm gonna give the floor to Julia. Thank you for listening to me and my reply workshop.
Well done. Thank you so much. That was inspiring. I was really feeling the Christmas spirit, especially at the beginning, which I feel like is the most important part of the reply speech, is actually getting to feel something and bringing out your audience's emotions and yeah, winning the debate. So awesome. Thank you so much, Borko. We love you. Now we will transition into the flowing section of this workshop. So can everybody see? It should say flowing.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, perfect. So everybody, let's get into it. What? That's usually the first reaction that I get when I tell people that I want to teach them about flowing. It is not necessarily a very common word. In English, translation to Bulgarian probably doesn't make much sense, but just consider it a special debate term. It is basically note-taking, but cooler. So I understand that debate can be a lot. It is complicated, messy, confusing, overwhelming all at once and at various points throughout the debate, before the debate, after the debate. But what I'm here to tell you is that it doesn't have to be that way, because flowing makes debating easier, more organized, and clearer for both your own sense and for everybody involved. So what I'm trying to work on with our community and what I hope to really achieve by the end of this year is that everybody, including judges and participants, are working to flow or take notes in the same manner so that we can all be on the same page as the debate happens, which will lead to overall better debates. I am also going to warn you that this lecture might seem like it's coming out of left field. It might seem all of these things, complicated, messy, confusing, but two things. One, I want you to come in with an open mind. Two is that I am recording it, so you can always go back and rewatch what I'm saying or practice and we can talk about it later. So come in with an open mind. Maybe take out some pieces of paper to take notes and stick with me for the next 35 minutes because I promise you this is going to be helpful. Also, at any point, please feel free to raise your hand to ask a question or anything else you might need. I'll also ask Borko, can you monitor anybody coming into the waiting room or if people are sending questions in the chat?
Yep, you got it.
Thank you. Okay, let's dive into it. Overview. The system flowing is a system for organizing and taking notes of a debate. This is also one of those terms that if you throw around in any debate community, they will know that you truly are an experienced debater. The general system has a couple key components. First, it uses multiple sheets of paper. They can even be different colored. We'll see how that works later. It is a system of columns and rows, kind of like a spreadsheet or a table. You also use different colored pens, one for each side. So for me, I always flow the proposition in blue and the opposition in red, but you can choose whatever you want. And it features a lot of shorthand or abbreviations, which we'll talk about later. And this is also that we can help to make structured chaos. Okay, the next thing I always get is, but Julia, my notes are good, like really, really good. Like you don't understand how good they are. And unfortunately, I don't care. In the nicest way possible. I'm sure they're great, and I'm sure for your geography and history classes, they are beautiful. But in debate, using this system will elevate you as a debater and make you all the better. So, as I mentioned, there are generally 4 pieces of paper. One piece of paper for the proposition case, another piece of paper for the opposition case, one sheet of paper for the introduction and conclusion, and a last sheet of paper for a new argument. Or if you are, say, the first proposition or first opposition speaker, maybe you have 2 argument pages. We'll talk more about that later. But generally, you have these 4 pieces of paper that will help you to compartmentalize or put into boxes or on certain areas the different parts of the debate. You'll also notice that they're all horizontal. This is intentional. Your main focus when flowing is preparing your speech. What this means is, while yes, you should be paying attention to what the opponents and your teammates are saying, you are doing it in a manner that helps to best prepare you for giving your speech. So especially for someone that's, say, in the second opposition speech where you have a lot of responsibilities, your goal is to take as many notes as you need and to prepare you to give that great speech. And for our third speakers, I have a special section here that hopefully will be the key to unlock your perfect third speech. So how do I do that? As I said, you are trying to write the key arguments and points of all of the speeches that happened before your speech. Not everything, but just the most important things that kind of trigger in your head what the argument is, what you're supposed to say, etc. This means that you need to be focusing on listening critically rather than writing every word. Because when you go to give your speech, you're not going to be reading directly off a piece of paper. Instead, you're going to be looking at bullet points or shorthand to kind of trigger what you need to say for your speech. And lastly, as I said, that the goal is to help you prepare for your speech, you should be taking more notes of what you are going to say rather than what the other people are saying. And we'll see how that works in a bit. Questions so far? Okay, before I jump into the technicalities of things, I did want to show you some shorthand things that might be helpful for you. So feel free to take a screenshot of this or write some of them down. These are just some examples of shorthands that I use to help make my flowing easier. So for example, I use arrows to represent things like improve, increase, benefit, down arrow for decrease or lowers, forward arrow to show leads to or causes, exclamation point for impact, money for anything related, or the dollar sign is related to anything having to do with the economy, money. I like to shorthand every word that has multiple syllables. So environment, economy, global warming. You can imagine whatever it is, I have a shorthand for it. Equal sign for is, I like to use this K2, and I sometimes even draw a little line under it to show like key to or important for. So for example, if I were saying like consumer prices are key to the economy, so the amount of prices for bread, oil, gas, food is most important for the economy, I might write prices K2 econ or prices K2 money, something like that. B/C for because, I use a little triangle, the delta in math for changes. You can develop your own shorthand, but these are some things that I use to help make my sheet cleaner and make it so that I have to write and read less. So when you're thinking about how to be, what's the first step that you can make to improve your note taking is first developing shorthand and forcing yourself to use it. Something that you might want to do if you have old copies of your flows or of your notes is to look back and literally rewrite them using the various shorthand to see what ways you could shorten what you're writing, which will give you A, more time to think about what you're going to say, and B, make it easier for you when you are giving your speech to just reference these key terms or shorthand. Questions? Okay, let's go back to our 4 pieces of paper and we're going to walk through what should happen on each of these sheets of paper. And then I have put together an example of how the flow should look for an example opposition speech. So let's start with what I think is very straightforward, which is the intro and conclusion page. This gets its own separate sheet of paper, and I will tell you why later. But this is something that you should have for each of your speeches. So most people, this is just one, but maybe if you're giving the reply speech and something like this might be helpful, using what Borko said, You might have 2 of these, one for your main speech and then the other for the reply speech. Up to you. But everybody should have this separate sheet of paper that literally just has the first part and the last part of your speech. This is something that can totally be done before the debate happens, thinking about what your attention grabber is going to be, what the team line is, and whatever else is necessary for your speech's role. So if you're one of the first speakers, maybe this includes some definitions, some key frameworks, or some burdens, whatever you need in your intro, putting it here in this top half of the page with bullet points is perfect. And then the conclusion, how are you going to end your speech? What is the thesis, or what is it that you want the judge to take away from your speech? This doesn't have to be completely pre-written, but one of the benefits of having a separate sheet or a separate area of like your speech for this is so that you don't forget the conclusion. Something that I've been noticing a lot and something that I want to improve on is that we are really, really getting good at attention grabbers. Start getting rid of the dear judges and the ladies and gentlemen and moving into jumping right into that attention grabber, which is amazing. Now, what I want to focus on is ending our speeches with a strong conclusion every time, instead of just saying, oh, my time is running out, so that's it, or, and yeah, that concludes my speech. Having a really, really strong conclusion to leave the judge really excited about voting for your side. So this separate sheet of paper, you'll see where it falls in and why we're using separate sheets later, but this is pretty straightforward. Intro, conclusion. Questions on this piece of paper? This is also something really good to work on, like in between speeches, right? If you have some extra time and you're not really sure what to do, hopping to this page, pulling it out, and just jotting some things down is a really good thing that you can probably do in 30 seconds, as it takes somebody else to get prepared for their speech. Okay, let's move on then to the other pretty straightforward piece of paper. This is the new argument page. This is for the first and second speeches. So whether you are the first speaker and you might be presenting 2 arguments, or you are the second speaker and probably presenting 1 argument, you know, the third argument or whatever it may be, each new argument gets its own sheet of paper. And this follows the outlines that I showed you, or we've hopefully been using over the past year, where you should have the name of the argument, so something clear, the economy. You have your claim, your strong statement that explains what you are trying to support, all of the warrants you might need, and the impact. This should be in a bulleted form. And it is also on a separate sheet of paper to keep you organized so that you know when you are moving on to the new argument, everything you need is there. This again should be in bullet points and using that shorthand I showed you. On the right-hand side of the piece of the paper are kind of places for brainstorming. So if there are any rhetorical phrases, quotes, or ideas that you want to be sure to use, or you're not really sure where you want to use them, they can go here, or any other extra thoughts and notes that don't necessarily fit in to this outline, but you think you might want to use later. That can go on the right-hand side. And so, for example, say you come into the debate, say it's a prepared debate or even impromptu, and you know that you have this, you know that you have your outline already. As the debate continues, and say the other team or your partner brings up an example or an analogy that you either want to expand on from your partner, or you want to kind of reframe from your opponent, that would be a good place to add to during the debate. But generally, this should be pre-prepared and brought into the debate, and maybe you're just adding little filling in the blanks as needed throughout the debate. So this is the new argument page, mainly for first and second speakers. If whichever of the speeches takes multiple arguments, takes maybe 1 or 2 arguments, you would have an individual piece of paper for one argument and another separate sheet of paper for the other one. This is also so that you don't really need or want to be writing on the back of pages unless you have to, just because typically things on the back tend to get forgotten. That's why I encourage you to just use one side of the paper for the most part. Okay, questions on this stuff before we jump into probably what will seem very new and maybe a little bit complicated? Okay, then let's go to the case pages. So we know that each side of the debate has their own case. The proposition has a case and the opposition has a case. And those cases are the entire set of arguments that the team is presenting. It's not the rebuttal, it's just here's our first argument, here's our second argument, here's our third argument, team line, etc. So each team's arguments stay on their case pages. This is an example of a case page that I'm going to be uploading on to the website that you can use to kind of work from. But the good news is it's pretty simple. It's just 4 columns. So you could take a normal blank sheet of paper, fold it in half and fold it in quarters and make your own columns. You don't need all this fancy schmancy stuff unless you want to have it. So the proposition gets its own case page and the opposition gets its own case page. This is also where colors can come in handy. So writing the proposition in the proposition color, the opposition in the opposition color, using different sheets of paper, whatever. I'm going to fill in what this looks like and what goes where, but this is an example of a flow sheet that you could start from, or you can model once if you don't feel like printing it out. So what you'll see is that each speech gets its own column. The first proposition has the first column, second proposition has the second, and it goes forward. So therefore, you see that the progress of the debate happens horizontally across the piece of paper. And the progress of the speech happens top to bottom. So whatever the first proposition speaker says first starts up here. And then as the debate continues, you continue to flow down the sheet of paper in this general area. So since I have this arrow here, I'll show you an example. So in this big section of this column, we want to put the arguments that the second proposition team is making. And as we remember that the main purpose of flowing is to prepare for your speech, you want to be writing the answers that you have to their arguments over here in another like mini column and another color as the debate happens. So you're listening, you hear that they bring up this first argument, you write your answer. They bring up a second argument, and you write your answer to that. You can see that I've given myself space so that I have a visual representation that, okay, they've moved on. I've also used some things like underlining and dash marks for bullets to kind of differentiate what the main arguments are. So what we worked on a lot last year was being able to structure a case, having distinct contentions or distinct arguments with warrants and impacts. So especially for our higher level debaters where everybody should be using this structure, following and flowing the debate in this manner makes it so much easier for you to kind of make sure that you're getting the key points and also prepare yourself to write the answers down. So just because I have this arrow here, this is the same kind of structure that you would use in this column as well. I am going to show you an example of how the debate would develop and how I would flow a debate, a mock debate. But before we do that, is there anything that I can re-explain or or any questions that anyone has? Okay, I hope that means that it kind of makes sense and not that you are totally lost. Okay. Some reminders is that 1, you only need to flow up to the point of your speech. So if you are the first opposition speaker and not giving the reply speech, that means that you only really need to be taking these very intensive notes up until your speech. And then after that, sure, you can keep taking notes, but you don't necessarily have to, because again, you're not speaking again. And instead, you should focus on coming up with amazing POIs. And maybe flowing helps with that, but generally you are only flowing up until the column that has your speech in it. But say, for example, you're the first proposition speaker and you're giving the reply speech. I made a joke. It's probably not funny. Crack those knuckles. You should flow the whole debate. But you're probably going to be doing it in a much higher level, right? A big bird's eye view, because every piece of evidence that the other team is bringing up, you're probably not going to need to bring up in the reply speech. So you're focusing on the core elements of the debate and kind of working to think about how those elements line up. So that's just a general reminder. Okay, questions? Okay, then let's do this. We are going to look at an example of a flow as if we are the opposition side and the second speaker on the motion, this House would abolish the Olympic Games. And we're going to walk through what a potential debate might look like. The other question that I might be in the back of your head, especially as we are all techie, is can I do this on my computer? No, please don't try this on your computer. It is best if you do it by hand, especially because we are highly, highly discouraging the use of computers for speech giving in this as we transition to fully in-person tournaments. So your notes and your preparation for your speech should be all written down or printed on paper. Okay, so let's take a look. Motion, this House would abolish, which means to permanently end the Olympic Games. I think we all know what the Olympics are. And we are taking the flow of probably the hardest speaker, which is the second opposition speaker. After this, we'll look at how this might affect of how flowing will help the third speaker as well. Okay, so this is also a great review to know about what the responsibilities of each speech are. So the first proposition speech, and also you can feel free if you want to kind of take notes along with me on your own, blank sheets of paper. You see I have blank unlined paper that is clean. You guys can do that as well, or you can just listen and watch later. Okay, so the general first proposition order is doing the introduction, presenting the new arguments, and then the conclusion. So for me taking notes as the second opposition speaker, I would be first listening. I would take out the proposition case page, right? Because the arguments are being presented in this first proposition speaker. And the first proposition speaker goes off and they start with some amazing definitions. Well, they had an attention grabber, but honestly didn't really care about it. It was boring. Then they have their definitions that abolish means to permanently end. They bring up the team line that the Olympic Games are outdated and cause more harm than good. I leave some space here to show that they're going into their first argument, which I number, and it says that the Olympic Games are outdated. I leave some more space and they provide two warrants that too much money is spent on a pointless event and no one cares about sports that much. So when they're presenting these arguments, they're probably doing some rhetoric, maybe they're having some evidence. They're probably talking about this for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, which gives me the chance to kind of internalize it and, if necessary, write down any rebuttals that I'm thinking of. But since I know that my partner, the amazing opposition one speaker, is going to be making those rebuttals, primarily, I don't need to focus on that too much. I'm just listening and seeing if I can have any great POIs and listening to make sure that I get the key points. After they do the first argument, they say, now on to my second argument. Remember that roadmap in that signposting? This is where that comes in handy because it signals to me, the debater, and maybe the judge, that it's time to move on down their flow, give some space, and number the second argument, which is that the Olympic Games harm host cities. I have an underline there to represent that it's a main argument, and I have some warrants. It costs money, it hurts the environment, and it displaces locals. Again, the first proposition speaker is probably spending 2 to 3 minutes kind of explaining all of these out, but you're listening to the debate already. Trust yourself. Knowing these 3 key points, I probably can remember what those arguments are without having to write down everything the first proposition speaker is saying. And that's it. That's the end of the first proposition speech. And now we're ready for the first opposition speech. Before we do that, any questions? Okay, first opposition speaker speech. And again, we are flowing as if we are the second op. So we have a little bit of a ways to go. The order, as a reminder, for the first opposition speaker is to go to their introduction, then to rebut the first proposition, then present their new arguments, and then go to their conclusion. So let's see what that looks like. The first, or after their introduction, then they go to their rebuttal. And since this is my partner and I need to be aware of any arguments that they are making so that I can extend them if needed, I need to make sure that I'm flowing their answers. And as you could guess, where did the answers that they make go? They are making direct answers to what the first proposition has proposed on their case, which means that the answers to those arguments should go on the first propositions in the first proposition column, because it's not something that's supporting the opposition case. It is instead something that's responding to the first proposition case, which means that as my partner is speaking, I am flowing their responses here in their own little column. You can even label it if you want. First opposition, my partner says that we accept the definitions. That makes sense to me. And then they make some rebuttals about why, it's not outdated. They still bring people together, and that they say that it doesn't harm host cities because it actually brings tons of investment money to hosts. And again, your partner is probably making a bunch of different rebuttals and a bunch of different arguments, and you want to write down the most important ones that you, or what you think are the strongest ones that you might need later. So this is how you flow the rebuttal of the first proposition speech. Questions before we go into the next part?
Yes, I have one. Do we write our answers, rebuttals to the proposition 1, or just rewrite the rebuttals of our partner opposition 1?
Good point. So that's actually a great point. So up to you. If you think there is a really strong rebuttal that your partner didn't make, or when you're listening to the first proposition before your partner even speaks and you want to write something down, absolutely do that. You can either do it in a different color so that it's not something that was actually said yet in the debate, but you still think it's important, or you could put a star or a circle next to it or around it that would indicate to you that maybe it's something you want to bring up if it makes sense when it's actually time to give your speech. So good point. Yes, definitely include it if you think it's strong, but also knowing that your partner has their whole speech, maybe they might say something later. Good question. Other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay, so your partner has done their introduction, they've done the rebuttal, and now it's time for their new argument. And good news is you're already kind of a pro at how this should look. But since it is an argument that is in favor of the opposition case, it goes on this separate opposition page, right? The opposition case goes with on the opposition case page. So your partner goes into their team line about how the Olympic Games are an important historical event and they increase global understanding. And then they have their main arguments. First, the Olympic Games are good for athletes. It's a way for athletes to go pro and make money, and for them to have a chance to practice their passion. You leave some space, and then your partner talks about how they are allows for good role models that kids can look up to and motivate them to work hard either in their sport or in whatever it is that they are passionate about. And both of these are really great things for the Olympic Games. So your partner is speaking, or maybe you even know what they're going to say before and you write this down before the debate. Up to you. But you know that you want to get the main ideas down and you put it in this page or in this section. Questions?
I have one.
Yep.
Okay, so up now with what I understood is that we write down what our partner is saying and what the other side is saying. It's like during this thing, can we assist our partners with some answers, something that we have caught on during the other person's speech? Like, can we assist one another in the team?
That's a great question. So it's kind of tricky because there is not really a time in between speeches for partners to talk. And there's also not designated preparation time that you can take during the debate to actually have these conversations, which means that you kind of have to do it sparingly and a little bit sneakily. So if, for example, you think of a really, really great idea while your opponent is giving their first proposition speech, and you want to make sure that your partner who's giving the first opposition speech makes an argument that you want, maybe you might whisper it to them quietly if it's something short and sweet, or you might pass them a note. But what you don't want to do is kind of cause too much of a distraction or to make your partner confused. So say it's a really complicated argument or something like that, it's probably not something that you want to kind of take time to like explain an entire thesis. So something that is short, easily understandable, and maybe something that your partner might have already missed, that'd be a great thing to do as by passing a note or making a quick whisper. But other than that, it's kind of like your partner, you got to trust your partners. And if needed, you can hopefully make up for it in your speeches later.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, I have a question, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
I'm a debater for quite a time, but I still do not know how much time is it okay to take in between speeches. And you said that there is no time to take, but the judges usually give us 1 to 2 minutes. Is that always the case? And what happens if, the other team is asking for more than that, if you get my point?
Yeah, I think that it's always tough because it's like, especially as judges, I mean, everybody wants you to give the best speech that you can. And usually, and especially in the real world, that means taking a couple minutes to collect yourself. So I would say it's usually good to have because the judge needs to get their notes in order and kind of get ready for the next speech anyway. So I would say there's usually 30 seconds to a minute where you can kind of put things together. But as a judge, you can kind of feel when it's been too long. And what I start to do is clear my throat, shuffle my papers, look at my watch, something like that. So it's okay to just say that you might take a couple seconds to get things together, but have in mind that this is not a time for you to conference with your partners or to, finish writing your speech. And I hope that flowing will help you to feel more prepared going into your speech, so that if there is something that you need to finish really quickly or an idea you need to get down, you can do that. But I would say 30 seconds to a minute is about the right time. And then it's kind of like you just got to go.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep. Other questions? Okay, then let's jump back into this. So your partner has already given their first speech, their arguments, and you have them all set. Next, we're going into the second proposition speech. And we know that the order of this speech, the speech's roles are to do an intro, rebuttal of the first opposition, then to, never forget, extend their partner's arguments from the first proposition, then present new arguments, and then conclude. So what this means is that we need to make sure that we have our opposition case out so that we have their rebuttals down, and we have their proposition case out so that we can mark down any extensions and write down new arguments. So as you can see here, this is all kind of like a microcosm, right? Where it's like, if the debater is prepared to, prepares the debate for the debate in the proper way, and then gives a speech in the proper way, then the teams and the judges can flow the proper way, which makes it all the more organized, and we can focus more on the arguments itself. So they've given their introduction, and now they're going into the second proposition. Speaker is going into rebutting the first opposition. And this is going to look very, very similar to what we just saw on the last page. They are putting the arguments that are made by the proposition in directly on this first opposition column, because it's a direct rebuttal to the opposition case. And again, you'll notice that I'm writing it in a different color so that I'm clear that this is what the proposition team is saying. I'm also lining up the arguments next to the ones that are being made So I know that if their argument is that the Olympic Games are good for athletes, the second proposition team is making the arguments that no, it's bad for athlete mental health. Look at people like Simone Biles. Then it's all in one place, and that's what also helps with spacing. And the thing is that remember what I said, is that the theme of the flowing is always to prepare your speech. And for you as the second opposition speaker, that means that you need to be preparing to extend the argument that your partner says, right? So if your opponent has just said that, made an argument against why the Olympic Games are good for athletes, you are already thinking of an answer to what they just said. So they're going on and on about how it's bad for mental health. They're talking about Simone Biles and stress and yada, yada, yada. And while this is all happening, you already have the main idea of the argument. You're working on what is my response going to be? And look, it's already in your opposition speech column, so that when you go to give your speech, you already can say, hey, look at this. Extend my partner's first argument about how the Olympic Games are good for athletes. It's a way for athletes to go pro and practice their passion. They try to say that it's bad for mental health, but our argument is that any job is competitive and it's a choice to enroll in them. And there are other things that make it beneficial for athletes, like prestige and sponsorships and ways to make a living that outweigh these very, very small instances of mental health. So you can see how I just was able to give a very clear extension and using that rebuttal formula that we know, just based on this flowing. We've already done the work here, and we're setting ourselves up for a really, really successful speech because it's all organized in the places where you need to go. Also, I want to take a moment here to recognize that it is 9 o'clock. And just for the sake of this recording, I am going to continue. Maybe it'll last maybe another 20 minutes. But if you have to go, you can always catch the recording later. So have no fear. But if you want to stick around, I will be here continuing on. Also, if anybody has questions before they leave, please feel free to ask now. And a reminder that the Fall West motions have been released on our website, so feel free to check those out. And the Fall East ones will come out probably late next weekend. And the last, or actually, when is this? Sorry, they will probably come out this weekend because we have our motions briefing a week from today, Monday, October 24th at 8 p.m. for you to hear more about the motions, how to prepare for them, and that will be for both Fall East and Fall West. So what that means is I have to get my motions together. Okay, I'll take any questions for people that are going to leave. Otherwise, feel free to stick around and I'm going to keep going with how to flow. Okay, lovely. Let's push on then. So our opponents, the second proposition speaker, has started their rebuttal. As they're doing that, I'm writing down what my answers are going to be in my second opposition speech. Then they move on to rebutting the second argument. And they say, nope, look at Michael Phelps, look at the Russian dopers, look at this example, that example of how they're not good role models. And I write my responses here too. These are the exceptions, not the rule. Whatever my answers are going to be. What is also really helpful with flowing is that it shows you when the other team hasn't responded to what you think is a really good argument. So say, for example, they didn't make this say, for example, they'd never made that argument, then you would see an entire blank space that was completely empty and shows, and this is something that you can be really excited about to tell the judges, right? They have conceded our second argument, which is that the Olympic Games create good role models for kids. This is really important because XYZ, and they didn't even address it, right? So it's a visual representation of the debate that helps to show you what is answered where and what is not answered that you can capitalize on, which is always awesome. Okay, questions about this so far? Okay, then let's move back to our first proposition page. So the second proposition speech Again, they did the rebuttal of the first opposition, and now their next job is to extend their partner's arguments before they present new arguments. So we see here that we write that down. You can write, extend arguments 1, that they're outdated. Maybe usually I would just draw an arrow, but it doesn't really show up well on this like software that I'm using. So usually you just draw an arrow and maybe any responses that they have to this. So the second proposition speaker is probably going to do some weighing about why, there are other ways to bring people together. Maybe you write that down. Maybe you don't feel like extending your partner's argument later, whatever. But it's another example, and this is similar to the question that was first asked about what if you have your own arguments that you want to make against the other team that your partner didn't make? Maybe you write those down here in this section, or you write them back in the original section. But generally, if there's something additional that I want to bring up in my second speech, I can write them here. The host cities get, tons of money and fame, and there's a global benefit to the Olympic Games that the proposition isn't being fair about. And maybe the Olympic Games help to stabilize host cities because it creates a huge influx of money, attention, and infrastructure that creates long-term change that's really beneficial. Whatever it might be, whatever you want to do, it's not necessary, but there's space for it if you need it. And then the second proposition speaker presents their third argument, which is that the Olympic Committee is unfair and whatever else you may be. And because this is the main argument that I'm going to be rebutting, I also try to write my responses to that directly here. And I even number them because why the heck not? It shows that you are, what's the word I'm looking for? You're organized and know what you're going to say. So write them here. Again, exception, not the rule. And we can reform the Olympic Committee, and the benefits outweigh the small negatives. Maybe you might see where this debate is going. It's all about these exceptions and the rules, whatever. But because, again, they're going to be spending 2 to 3 minutes explaining why it's unfair, you probably already anticipated these arguments, which means you are focused on how you can best prepare your speech by writing your responses directly where they're supposed to go in the column. And that brings us to the end of Prop 2 and on to Op 2, which is your speech. Questions before we dive into this?
Can I make a question, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's say that one of your mates says something that's kind of not wrong, but out of the topic. Can you do something to make it better? I mean, if their time is finished and they cannot speak anymore, can you say something to correct their mistake, maybe?
Yeah, okay. Very, very good question. Also kind of interesting. It's kind of a tough line to walk on. So the good news is that in this type of debate in world schools, you don't have to answer every argument or extend every argument that your partner makes or every piece of evidence or idea. If something is a bad argument, you can kind of leave it in the past and it kind of should be left there. But say, for example, your partner says something that was just like wrong, or it was poorly worded, and your opponents try to like jump on that and kind of reframe it and make it a big part of the debate. As the next speaker and a partner, you want to, yes, definitely answer it and kind of reframe things if it is something that has been capitalized by your opponents. If it was ignored by them, then just drop it. But just keep in mind that when you are re-explaining it, never ever trash talk your partner or talk about them negatively. What you want to always frame it as is like, our argument is blank. So kind of framing it affirmatively of being like rephrasing it in a way that's true or that's better, and just using that like our phrase, or just maybe say, instead of being like, oh, my partner, I mean, unless your partner literally just misread a statistic and you can say, oh, they misread the statistic. But if they explained it wrong, just explain it confidently and answer the arguments of your opponent. But just be careful that you don't do it in a way that looks like you think, which I don't think that anyone would, but can sometimes happen. Don't let any sort of like anger, upsetness that you have at your partner show in your speech. Always be sure that you're like, nope, we're fine. Here's like very confidently what the argument is and why we're winning it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay. What we have all been waiting for and what I hope is kind of everything coming together. The second opposition speech. The order is the same of the second proposition speech, except this time you are giving it. We start with the introduction, we go into the rebuttal of the second proposition, we extend our partner's arguments from the first opposition speaker, then we present our new argument, and then we go into our conclusion. And what you'll see is that we have a piece of paper or a section of the paper for each part of these. So we have 5 sheets of paper, or 4 sheets of paper. We have the introduction and conclusion page. We have the proposition case with the grid, the opposition case with the grid, and the new argument. And if the speech order is intro, rebuttal of the proposition case, extension of the opposition case, our new argument in our conclusion, the only thing that you need to do is stack your sheets of paper in that order, knowing that once you finish the introduction, you just put that at the back of your stack so that you can have your conclusion page there. Fewer sheets of paper, I think you can manage it. But as you see here, you already have your roadmap and you have a physical way to signpost for the judge what you're moving on to. And it's all organized and for the most part pre-prepared so that before your speech, you're already like, ah, I've been working on this speech the whole time and you're ready to go. So you put the intro conclusion page on top, the prop case under, op case under that, new argument next. And then once you're done, as you're speaking, you're just tossing the intro and conclusion page to the back. Questions about this stacking?
Yeah, I have a question. How big are the sheets of paper that we're talking about?
Normal sheets of paper you'd get out of the printer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sometimes you can put color, like if you have like random stacks, like you want to make each page a different color, you can do that, but you don't need to. That's like high level. I don't know if that's what your thing is. Or if you're one of those people that follows like the TikTok note-taking strategies where it's all pretty, maybe you want multiple colors of paper. But just normal printer paper. We used to bring a big ream or a big like stack of printer paper with us to the tournament. So we just always had tons of blank paper to write on. Other questions? Okay, so I have my intro and conclusion page, which I have pre-prepared before the tournament. I already know my framing and I already had this written down because I know the benefits of the Olympic Games, which are that it's a unique world event that brings together millions of people from around the world. Probably put our team line on there. Maybe I put in some quotes. I don't know. You guys didn't need to have this whole speech out here, but I'm starting my page and I'm starting my speech and this is at the beginning. I know exactly where to look. I give my introduction and then I put this sheet on the bottom of the stack because I know I'm going to come back to the conclusion later. Then I go into my rebuttals of the second proposition speech. And good news is that I already have my rebuttals written down and they're organized. So what the arguments are, right? I'm looking here and I say, since they extended both these arguments, you would be like, right, they keep trying to say that the Olympic Games are outdated. We have shown you a global benefit that is still present, that is very unique to the Olympic Games. My partner has said about how the Olympic Games bring people together, which is a unique benefit that we should not lose. Then they try to talk about why it hurts host cities. But we have shown, and I want to present this argument, that it brings new investment to hosts, which causes a stabilization to the host cities that absent the Olympic Games, they would not receive. Tons of money goes into the host cities. Their new argument is that the Olympic Committee is unfair, but this is assuming that we can't reform the Olympic game, which is our first argument. Our second argument is that the small examples that they're talking about are exceptions, not the rule. And the Olympic Committee overall brings together people from all over the world to make rules and enforce them. And lastly, overall, we are saying that the benefits of the Olympic Games outweigh the small negatives, especially considering that there is no other event in the world that brings so many countries and people together, right? I was already prepared to give that speech because I already had these rebuttals. Looking and seeing that, okay, I have the first argument underlined and I know what the arguments are as they are associated with them. Same here, and same here, right? It's all organized, and I just have to know, my eyes know where to go. So even though this might be something that takes a while to get used to, after you do it for maybe one tournament or a couple of practice debates, your eyes will instinctively know where to go, which makes you seem like a more confident and competent speaker, which is great. Questions about the rebuttal? Okay, the next job is to extend my partner's speech, which again, I've already prepared while the other two people were speaking. I can just look here to the first opposition speech. I have what my partner's point was: extend our first argument that the Olympic Games are good for athletes. We've shown that it's a way for them to go pro and make money, right? I think I already did this in the last section, but you can see how it's all compartmentalized, and I already have this separate sheet of paper that allows me to make sure that I'm extending, rebutting, and impacting out the argument for each of the arguments. And remember that hypothetical example where maybe they didn't make these arguments about Michael Phelps and Russian dopers, then maybe you can say, and they also conceded our second argument and impacted out there. So you have what you need where you need it. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
It's not about like this in particular, it's more about the entire thing. Like if the topic and during when we're talking, like we're writing down our notes and the answers that we have, is it okay if we bring sensitive examples in, like, you know, in the opposition? It's like to counter what the opponent said.
What would you describe as sensitive?
You know, just like for example, without a trigger warning for people, you know, just like you said for the Olympic Games, I saw about plenty of people like going through multiple assaults. So like, can we use those statistics with trigger warnings, obviously?
I would say yes. Use your best judgment. That you want to be, it's good to use factual, you know, real, like if this is the impact of something that we're talking about, I think that it's expected that it's going to be talked about in the debate, so it's okay. And if you feel compelled to give a trigger warning for those involved, like definitely do so probably before you start your speech. But just be mindful that maybe you don't need to go into like gruesome details of things that could be particularly triggering for others. But if something is a part of the debate or something that is a part of this topic discussion, then it's probably important that it's used.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted, you know, the trigger warnings, if we could use them.
Yep. And now that I think about it, if, for example, you were to give a trigger warning before your speech and somebody says that they don't want to, like whatever, they're not comfortable with it, then maybe think about if it's really necessary for you to include and how you could kind of work around it, because it's not like you can get a new judge in the middle of the debate. So just be mindful that if something is particularly triggering, it just may not be included, but I've never heard of that happening, but just in case.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yep, good question. Other questions? Okay. So we did our rebuttal, we did our extension, which means that the next step is our new argument, which again is on its own page. And this is so that you don't have to worry about making sure that things fit on this page. It's already separate. And since it hasn't been talked about before, right, you haven't presented these arguments before, it is clean. So you have your name of your argument, which is globalization and understanding. You have your claim, you have your warrant, you have your impact, and maybe as the arguments went on, or as you were thinking, you wanted to write these little notes about globalization being inevitable, and the only question is, are we going to make it successful, right? Something you want to add. But I had already come into this speech with this argument pre-prepared. Especially for prepared motions, this should be done before the debate starts. And maybe if you're in an impromptu debate and you're pressed for time for preparation, maybe this is something you're adding to during the debate as you have time for. But generally, this is clean and separate and ready to go no matter what else happens on the flow, because it is an independent, distinct argument that you are presenting as the second opposition speaker. So again, you have this and you kind of just read straight down, top to bottom, like we have been doing for the rest of the speeches. Questions? Okay, and then the last part of your speech is the conclusion, which you again also have on that sheet, and it should be in the order because you put that sheet on the back. So as you flip over your new argument page, you have your conclusion, which is very clear. Maybe you want to ad lib a little bit, but at least you know that even when you're giving the speech, so say for example, you're giving it, you put the intro and conclusion page on the back, you finish your rebuttal, so you put the proposition page down on the desk, you put the opposition case page down on the desk, you put the new argument, you're reading the new argument, you can still feel that you have another sheet of paper, which reminds you that you need to get to your conclusion, which makes it so that you have a good timing and a good like foresight of what your speech should look like. So again, it's a physical representation of the debate. So you go to your conclusion and then woohoo, you did it, right? Tons of lot going on, but you are going to give the most organized, once you practice flowing and stuff, you will give the most organized speech that makes it so that we don't have to worry about what you're talking about or where you're supposed to be saying it, but instead just focusing on the content of your arguments, which is awesome. Questions? We're almost done. Okay, a little bonus you don't have to use, but might be helpful, is sometimes whenever I debated, I like to put timestamps up in the corner of each of my pages so that I knew while going through my speech and while looking at my clock about where I should be or how much time to spend on each of the pages themselves. So I know that I should spend 30 seconds on my intro and conclusion page, my 2 minutes rebutting the proposition case, 1 minute and 30, whatever you deem is necessary. But this will help you with your timing of your speech so that, you know, maybe you might even put this as like a continuing running clock so that this maybe the last thing would be 7 minutes and 30 seconds, 5 minutes and 30 seconds, right? So that you know when you get to that point, you should move on. So it helps you to make sure that you are thinking in advance of how long each section of the debate is going to take. And also making sure that if you see that and you're like, oh crap, I'm running behind, you know to move on so you have the time for the rest of your speech, which means that we won't get to 8 minute and 30 second constructive speeches where we have stopped listening and you have run out of time to say what's most important. Okay, I'm going to pause that and jump to this section, which is called, wow, that was a lot. How do I learn? And what I say is to practice in small chunks. You can start, this is kind of an ordered list of how you can do that. You can start by having your partner or a teammate or a friend or your parent read a menu, a rap song, or a deck of cards aloud to practice spacing and shorthand. So you can pretend that somebody is reading a menu and they say, our team line is the sweet and sour soup. And our first argument is the spaghetti entrees. Our first piece of evidence is about the spaghetti bolognese, which is really important. And then our second piece of evidence is about the, I don't know, Spanish or spaghetti with chicken. I don't know, right? So you have somebody read something that doesn't matter what they're actually reading, but you can practice writing in columns, your spacing, your shorthand. Then after you get used to that, you can try to flow individual speeches to practice listening, writing, and incorporating your rebuttal. So this is an actual debate speech that maybe you can find online or listen to your partner and just practice one speech and check and see how you do. Maybe do this with your group, a team, your partners, your teammates, your group to see where things are going well, where there's room for improvement. And then I recommend that maybe you flow while watching practice debates on YouTube. This is so beneficial, not just to see how great debates are done, but also to practice flowing in a time where you don't necessarily need to give a speech. and then put it all together in some practice debates with your team, and then put it into practice at the tournament. And I implore you, please don't give up. It is difficult, and it is, like debate in general, a big learning curve, but committing to flowing will make you a better debater. And PS, don't be afraid to modify this to fit your style. One size does not fit all. So it is totally okay if you want to change things. I won't be offended, but I hope to at least see you following the flowing across the page thing and flowing up to down, hopefully with different colors. It is 9:23. This is the conclusion of the flowing lecture. I am also going to continue going into a third speech applications for anyone that gives the third speech. But again, I know it's late, so feel free to duck out if you need to. Again, motions and topic areas have been released for Fall West. Head to our website, bestfoundation.bg, upcoming events, and scroll down to the bottom. The Fall West tournament is the 11th through the 13th of November in Blagoevgrad. The Fall East is the 25th to the 27th of November in Burgas. And the motions are going to be coming out next weekend, if not by Monday next time, where we will have our motions briefing at 8 p.m. Any questions before I jump back to the third speech? I totally mistimed. I guess I wasn't flowing my own presentation.
I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, but I just I went to the Best Foundation, the page. I need the motions, and I don't have the motions. They are not there.
So go to Best Foundation.
This is what I did, but I don't see them.
Did you click upcoming events?
Yeah.
Did you click Fall West?
Yes.
And you scroll down to the bottom?
Well, yes, but you don't scroll down. You just, this what I see. It just a picture, and it says Fall West tournament, and that's it. I cannot scroll down.
Click the title that says Fall West tournament. Sorry, it's a hyperlink. And it should bring you to here, I can share my screen.
Okay, there are two.
Yes.
Two motions, not three.
Yep, this little announcement here, it shows that we are going to have the final motion be impromptu.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, then again, have a great night. I'm going to jump back to the third speeches just so that for the sake of the recording, you can always catch it later or not if you don't want to, but I'm going to do that really quickly. I will also take any other questions if people have them. Okay. Okay, third speech applications, it's a little bit different. Your new argument page is actually going to be your planning page. And this is so that because you are giving the speech that, you're not presenting any new arguments, your kind of section of your speech is your planning page, where you will create 2 to 3 columns, one for instead of each speech, you're giving columns for clash points, which means that you should probably be deciding your clash points along the way. And as you do this, you can highlight, underline, however you want to mark arguments in different colors on the case pages themselves to identify which clash points they will fall into, or you can just write them directly on your planning page. And you can create arguments or evidence references within clash point sections if you want. And I'll show you what that means. So if I were the third speaker, this is what my new argument page would be. And unfortunately for you all, as you know, this is not something that you can plan in advance, but is instead something that develops throughout the debate. But generally for the third speeches, we want to have 3 clash points that identify the main issues of contention during the debate. So hence the sections. And this is something that you kind of think of through as the debate progresses. So probably after the first set of speeches, the first prop, the first op, there's probably an area of contention or a clash point that you can identify to have written here and start to develop, so that while you're flowing on the case pages, on the 4-column pages, and you're writing down the most important ideas, you can start transferring those ideas or rewording them into your column that you are developing, right? By the end of the first opposition speech, there are probably 3, if not 4 arguments made in the debate. Probably one of those should align. Maybe it's the economy, maybe it's the environment, maybe it's the impact to people. And you can start kind of plugging and chugging or putting the arguments in the various buckets as they line up. Or maybe you think that some things align, but you don't necessarily know what to call them. That's okay. You can put them in the other column and figure it out later. It's all developing as the debate goes on. So how do you identify clash points? This is always so difficult. But as I said, these are the largest areas of controversy in the debate. Some examples of clash points might be, what is the best way to strengthen the economy, free immigration or restricted immigration? Which policy benefits workers the best? Or in our example debate, maybe it's, do the Olympic Games harm or help athletes? Do the Olympic Games harm or hurt host cities? Do they provide a benefit to the world? Right? These are probably some of the main clash points of that debate that we just walked through and might be developed as the debate goes on. And as I said, you want to reorganize the arguments that you have from your other sheet into these clash points. And it's something that is progressing along the way. So as I said, you want to fill in as you go, make sure that you use different colors, and depending on your preferences or style, you can either transfer from the case pages or just work directly in here. However you think is better. I think probably a mix of both, having the main ideas down, especially at the early parts of the debate on the case pages, and then as you get later, kind of maybe focusing more on these clash points. And depending on the style of your third speech, you may be using those case pages, but you're likely going to just do a lot of that clash and a lot of the rebuttal based off of this sheet itself. So you might not even need the case pages except for reference. And then you would just have your intro conclusion page and then this planning page. Sometimes what might be helpful is if you highlight the arguments that you think, maybe if you highlight in like red the arguments that the opposition, or whatever color I said it is, whatever the color it aligns with, you highlight in that color to show that it's something important you want to bring up and reference later. You might want to make a key, or you want even just cut it down or copy it down, whatever works for you as the third speaker. It took me a while, honestly, to figure out how to help third speakers. And I'm really grateful for Borko to helping us with the reply speeches, because I think overall, as these are the ones that you can't really plan in advance for, it's hard to prepare. But I think overall, the best way to prepare is to use flowing and having the ideas that Borko suggests with how to kind of compare the different cases at the end. So maybe your reply speech, you might have a separate reply speech, new argument page that's similar to here about time frame, magnitude, probability, or maybe it's about the burdens of each case. However you think might make sense, but just trying to do the work as it's happening and not leaving all of your preparation for before you give your speech, so that overall, as the debate is happening, you are focusing on taking notes that will help you to give the best speech or speeches. That is it. I will take any questions, but otherwise, I hope to see you on October 24th at 8 p.m. for our motions briefing. And thanks everyone for sticking around.